There I stood on what used to be my grandmother's apple orchard, watching bulldozers tear through 50-year-old trees, while a smug HOA president smirked beside a half-built boutique hotel. 3 months earlier, I was overseas on a veterinary mission, and now my inheritance was unrecognizable. But here's what they didn't know. I'm not just a small-town vet. I spent 5 years as a paralegal at one of Denver's top property law firms before vet school, and Grandma taught me one thing: always read the fine print and prepare for every contingency. I smiled back at the HOA president and pulled out a folder. "You might want to see this before you continue," I said, watching her face fall as she realized what she'd stepped into. "Where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment below, because this story is about to get wild." The day my grandmother Emma passed away was the hardest day of my life. She'd raised me since I was 8 after my parents died in a car accident, and her 15-acre farm on the outskirts of Boulder, Colorado had been my sanctuary. As I stood in her kitchen after the funeral, surrounded by casseroles from well-meaning neighbors, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was truly alone. The farm, with its historic apple orchard, century-old cabin, and stunning mountain views, was now mine, according to the will she had meticulously prepared with her longtime friend and attorney, William Fletcher. I'm Nathan Harrington, 35, a veterinarian with a small but successful practice in town. But before vet school, I'd spent 5 years as a paralegal at Westbrook & Associates, one of Denver's top property law firms. That experience would prove more valuable than I could have imagined. Grandma Emma knew the value of understanding the law. She'd fought off developers for decades. "Land is power, Nathan," she would say, "but only if you understand the rules that govern it." I'll never forget the nights I'd find her at the kitchen table, poring over property documents with a magnifying glass, making notes in her precise handwriting. She was preparing for something, though I didn't understand what at the time. 2 months after the funeral, I received a call that would change everything. Dr. Henna Rivers, a former professor of mine, offered me a position on a 3-month veterinary mission to Ecuador, helping endangered species in the Amazon rainforest. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, one I couldn't refuse, despite my hesitation about leaving the farm so soon after inheriting it. After a sleepless night weighing my options, I decided to go. I would need someone reliable to keep an eye on the place while I was gone. That's where Amber Collins came in. A 38-year-old investigative journalist for the local paper, she lived about a mile down the road and had been a friend of my grandmother's. She was working on a series about urban development encroaching on agricultural land and immediately understood the importance of protecting the farm. "I'd be happy to check on the place weekly, Nathan," she said, over coffee at my kitchen table. "I owe it to Emma. And honestly, your orchard might end up being a perfect case study for my series." Her sharp eyes and no-nonsense attitude reassured me. She wasn't someone who would be easily intimidated. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was just how much pressure was building around my grandmother's land. The luxurious Pinecrest Estates development had been expanding nearby, buying up all the neighboring farms, with only my grandmother's property standing in the way of their next phase of expansion. The Homeowners Association president, Diana Bennett, had approached my grandmother 3 times in the past 5 years with offers to buy. Each time, Emma had firmly refused, knowing Diana's development plans would destroy the historic orchard with its rare Hawkeye apples, some trees dating back to 1870. Before I left, I consulted with William Fletcher, my grandmother's 68-year-old attorney and friend. "Your grandmother anticipated this might happen," he said, pulling out a thick folder of documents from his briefcase. "She asked me to update these in case anything happened to her." Together, we went through property surveys, water rights documents dating back to the 19th century, and a historic landmark application she'd started for the orchard. We established a limited power of attorney for Amber to handle any emergencies, and I made sure all my legal protections were in place. I had no idea just how necessary they would be. The day before my departure, I took Amber around the property, showing her the old cabin, the tool shed, and most importantly, the orchard. I pointed out my grandmother's favorite tree, a gnarled old Hawkeye apple tree at the center of the orchard that had been there since the beginning. "This variety barely exists anymore," I explained. Grandma was so proud of preserving it. Amber nodded, snapping photos and taking notes as I showed her where the spare keys were hidden and gave her the schedule for watering and basic maintenance. I was 2 weeks into my trip, deep in the Ecuadorian rainforest with spotty satellite phone service, when I received Amber's first concerned text message. Attached was a photo of surveyors on the adjacent property, measuring suspiciously close to my property line. "Something's not right," her message read. They're acting like they have authority to be there. With limited connectivity, all I could do was send a brief reply, keep an eye on things, document everything. Little did I know what was already in motion. As my Jeep pulled away from the farm that last day, Diana Bennett watched from her black SUV parked discreetly down the road. She pulled out her phone and dialed. "He's gone," she said with a satisfied smile. "Time to start phase 1. Call Harris and tell him to prepare those special permits we discussed." The next 3 months would transform my inheritance in ways I couldn't have imagined. 3 weeks into my absence, Amber was working at her desk when her phone buzzed with a notification from the wildlife camera she'd set up overlooking my property. The footage showed Alexander Harris, the 49-year-old zoning commissioner known for favoring developers, walking my property line with a survey team. Amber immediately drove to investigate and found workers marking trees along the border with orange spray paint. When confronted, the foreman thrust a document at her. "We have permits for a community enhancement project in this area. Public land," he claimed, pointing vaguely toward a marker. Amber photographed the permit, official-looking but missing required signatures and location details. Her investigation uncovered an expedited approval for a vaguely named project that had bypassed several required review stages. No environmental impact study, no public comment period, just a rushed approval signed by Commissioner Harris. She consulted her friend Julia Morrison, an environmental lawyer, who quickly spotted the deception. They're using deliberately vague language and incorrect parcel numbers. These permits don't actually apply to Nathan's land, but they're written to look like they do. Classic developer trick. Acting quickly, Amber established a comprehensive monitoring system with hidden cameras, detailed journals, and collected soil samples from encroached areas. She hired a local guide to reach me in Ecuador, and I sent back brief instructions via satellite phone. Document everything. If they start seriously encroaching, check the safe under the kitchen floorboard. The combination is Grandma's birthday plus the year I graduated law school. Meanwhile, Diana Bennett was methodically manipulating the Pinecrest HOA board members through tailored incentives. Investment capital for one member's struggling business, political support for another's ambitions, and thinly veiled threats for others. One by one, they aligned with her vision for expanding onto my land. The first major boundary violation came within days. Under cover of darkness, construction equipment accidentally knocked down 30 feet of fence and cleared a significant section of apple trees. When Amber confronted the supervisor the next morning, she was threatened with trespassing charges on what was clearly my property. Julia's emergency legal filings hit roadblocks at every turn. "They've got people in every department," she explained in frustration. "Every filing gets lost, every complaint rerouted. This goes deeper than just one corrupt commissioner." After Amber published a small piece questioning the permits, she found her car tires slashed with a threatening note. That evening, she finally connected with me via satellite phone. Despite the static-filled connection, I gave her the safe combination, 052712. Inside, Amber discovered the resources my grandmother had prepared. Detailed property surveys, historical documentation, water rights from 1886, and most importantly, legal proof that the actual property boundaries differed from public maps, showing Diana was building on Harrington land. Attached was a letter titled, "In Case Diana Bennett Tries Again," with detailed maps of the true boundaries. By week 5, construction had begun in earnest. Heavy machinery tore through the heart of the orchard, uprooting generations, old trees, for what was clearly a substantial building foundation. Edward Bennett, Diana's husband and architect, approached Amber privately, sliding a manila envelope across a coffee shop table. "I can't be seen talking to you, but this has gone too far. Diana's obsessed with this project." The envelope contained plans for a Pinecrest boutique hotel and event center, vastly different from the community garden gazebo in the permits. More disturbing were financial documents, showing Diana had leveraged everything they owned. "We're nearly bankrupt after her last failed development. This hotel is her last chance financially. She's desperate," which makes her. James Wilson, a former town council member forced out after opposing Diana, provided crucial background. Diana keeps dirt on everyone. Officials who can't be bribed or blackmailed. I fought her on the wetlands development 3 years ago and suddenly faced anonymous financial misconduct allegations. All false, but I lost my seat and reputation before clearing my name. From Ecuador, I coordinated our counterintuitive let them build strategy through brief connectivity windows. Every dollar they spend, every permit they falsify, strengthens our position, I explained. Document everything, but don't show our full hand yet. This approach required patience, watching my inheritance being destroyed while building an airtight case. The Pinecrest Boutique Hotel was announced with fanfare in local media, portrayed as an eco-friendly retreat creating jobs. Absurd given the dozens of century-old trees already destroyed. Diana masterfully manipulated the town council with profit-sharing opportunities, political contributions, and by framing opposition as anti-progress and anti-community. Julia discovered the smoking gun in county records. Permits issued for entirely different parcel numbers than where construction was happening, based on deliberately falsified property maps. They created a parallel paper reality, she explained. On paper, they're building on properly rezoned land. In reality, they're building on protected agricultural land with a pending historic designation. At a contentious town council meeting, Diana confidently dismissed Amber's evidence of boundary and permit issues as technical matters being addressed. Showcasing architectural renderings, she declared, "Mr. Harrington has abandoned his property and we have legal right to develop it under adverse possession laws." As Amber left, she found her surveillance cameras vandalized, while a small group of residents had begun protesting on environmental grounds. I finally cut my trip short, messaging my team. "Got enough proof, taking earliest flight back. Don't do anything until I return. The more they build, the deeper they dig their own legal grave. Time to activate phase 1 of the trap." As my plane left Quito, Diana was breaking ground on the hotel's east wing, unaware that each shovelful of dirt was digging her a hole she'd never escape. After a 27-hour journey involving 3 flights and a rental car drive from Denver, I finally stood on what remained of my grandmother's farm. The sight hit me like a physical blow. Where the century-old apple orchard had once stood, a 3-story modern structure dominated the landscape, approximately 70% complete. Construction crews swarmed over the site like ants, working at a frantic pace. Several ancient trees lay on their sides, roots exposed to the air, waiting to be hauled away. The peaceful sanctuary I'd inherited was unrecognizable, transformed into a construction zone with cement mixers, portable toilets, and stacks of building materials where wildflowers had once grown. I felt a complex wave of emotions, grief for the destroyed trees, anger at the audacity of the theft, but also a cold, focused determination. My grandmother had prepared me for this possibility, and now it was time to honor her foresight. Before meeting with my team, I drove to the small cemetery where she was buried. Standing at her grave, I made a silent promise. "I won't just protect the land, Grandma. I'll expose the entire corrupt system that allowed this to happen." The quiet certainty of that moment centered me for the battle ahead. Back at the cabin, which thankfully remained untouched, I held a strategy meeting with Amber. She had compiled an impressive body of evidence, over 200 hours of video, 500 photographs, fraudulent permit applications, and recordings of Diana's private meetings with the HOA board. "You were right about letting them build," Amber said, spreading the documents across my kitchen table. "They've gotten increasingly careless, convinced no one can stop them now." Diana's been bragging to investors about how she outmaneuvered the property owner. I examined each piece of evidence methodically, exactly as I'd been trained to do during my years as a paralegal, organizing them into categories for our legal approach. The next day, I met with William Fletcher at his law office downtown. At 68, William still had the sharpest legal mind I knew, and he had already begun preparing our multi-layered legal strategy. "Your grandmother was brilliant, Nathan," he said, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed the documents. "She didn't just protect the land legally, she created a trap for anyone who tried to steal it." He showed me how the various documents we'd gathered would fit together to build our case. Boundary violations, fraudulent permits, historical designation, and, most crucially, the water rights that had been granted to my family in 1886. Daniel Brooks, a 55-year-old retired judge who had presided over many land dispute cases, agreed to consult on our legal strategy. "In my 30 years on the bench, I've never seen a more clear-cut case of fraud and corruption," he said after reviewing our evidence. "But Diana Bennett has powerful friends and a well-established pattern of manipulating the system. We need to be methodical, thorough, and prepared for her to fight dirty." With Daniel's guidance, we mapped out a legal strategy that would not just stop the construction, but potentially expose corruption throughout the local government. Rather than immediately revealing my return, I decided on a strategic approach. I visited the construction site dressed casually, presenting myself as a curious neighbor. "Quite a project you've got going here," I remarked to a supervisor. "How long until completion?" My innocent questions were met with boastful responses about the luxury amenities planned and the tight timeline for completion. Word of my presence quickly reached Diana, who personally came to give me a tour, not realizing who I was. "We're creating a world-class destination that will put this area on the map," Diana announced proudly, leading me through what would become the hotel lobby. At 52, she was impeccably dressed in a designer suit, her confidence radiating from every gesture. She pointed out features with practiced salesmanship: 12 luxury suites, a farm-to-table restaurant using locally sourced ingredients, and an event space that can host weddings for up to 200 guests. I nodded appreciatively, asking questions that prompted her to reveal more details about investors, timelines, and permit processes, each answer adding to our legal arsenal. "We're scheduled to open in exactly 1 month," she concluded triumphantly. "Bookings are already at 60% capacity for the first quarter." As we walked the property, I noticed a flurry of activity in one corner of the site. Workers were removing business registration documents and signage after receiving a phone call. When I casually strolled toward the area, Diana quickly redirected my attention to the spectacular mountain views from another angle. This obvious attempt to hide information only confirmed what we already suspected. The deeper we dug, the more irregularities we would find. Back at the cabin that evening, I examined my grandmother's documents more carefully and discovered the personal motivation behind Diana's actions. Among the papers in the safe was correspondence from the 1960s revealing that Diana's father had once worked for my grandmother as a land developer, proposing a theme park on the property. He'd been fired for fraudulent practices, including forged signatures on contracts. This wasn't just a business venture for Diana. It was a decades-old family vendetta. Understanding her emotional investment in the project helped explain her willingness to take extreme risks and break laws to acquire the land. Our legal team assembled for a detailed strategy session. Julia Morrison, with her environmental law expertise, William Fletcher, with his deep knowledge of property law, Daniel Brooks, with his judicial experience, and Amber, with her investigatory skills. Together we developed a multi-pronged legal approach based on boundary violations, permit fraud, historical designation, and water rights. Each element was strong individually. Combined, they created an impenetrable legal barrier to Diana's plans. I shared the details of my grandmother's foresight. 8 years before her death, she had initiated the process to have the apple orchard designated as a historical landmark due to its rare Hawkeye variety. The application had been approved at the state level, but deliberately blocked from final publication by Alexander Harris. This designation alone would make the development illegal. But it was just one piece of our strategy. Grandma didn't just prepare one line of defense, I explained to the team. She created an overlapping system of legal protections that would be triggered precisely when someone thought they were close to taking the land. After a week of gathering additional evidence and finalizing our strategy, I decided it was time for a direct confrontation. I invited Diana to meet me at a restaurant downtown, where she arrived still not knowing my true identity. "I appreciate your interest in our development," she began, but I cut her off by placing my driver's license on the table. Her expression transformed from confident charm to shocked recognition as she realized she was sitting across from Nathan Harrington, the property owner she thought was still in South America. "I know about the true boundary lines," I said calmly. "I know about the fraudulent permits, and I know about the history between our families." Diana's initial shock quickly hardened into defiance. "You're too late, Dr. Harrington," she said with a dismissive laugh. "Possession is 9/10 of the law. By this time next month, I'll have an operational hotel, and your land value will be halved. Accept it and move on." I maintained my composure, remembering my grandmother's patience in similar confrontations. "Then you should check the other 10th, Ms. Bennett," my grandmother used to say. "Never gamble on a piece of land unless you know who wrote the deed." Back with my team that evening, I revealed the decisive document from my grandmother's safe. Exclusive water rights to the only underground spring in the area, granted to our family in 1886 and never transferred. A critical factor because the hotel relied entirely on this water source for its fire suppression system and water supply. Without access to this water, the hotel couldn't open, regardless of how complete the structure might be. Diana had built her dream project on a foundation of fraud, and now she would discover it couldn't even turn on a single faucet legally. Early Monday morning, our legal team filed a comprehensive lawsuit and emergency injunction based on multiple separate violations. The document ran to over 200 pages, detailing each aspect of our case: boundary encroachment, fraudulent permits, environmental violations, and water rights infringement. Within hours, Judge Sophia Turner, a 60-year-old jurist known for her strict interpretation of property law and zero tolerance for fraud, called an emergency hearing for the following day. News of the filing spread quickly through the courthouse, and by afternoon, local reporters were gathered outside the construction site, where work continued at its frantic pace. The emergency hearing was standing room only. Diana arrived with her expensive attorney, Jonathan Sullivan, a 48-year-old legal shark known for representing developers in contentious cases. They exuded confidence as they took their seats, Sullivan arranging his monogrammed leather portfolio with theatrical precision. Our team sat quietly across the aisle, William Fletcher calmly reviewing notes while Julia organized exhibits. Judge Turner entered, her reputation for no-nonsense efficiency immediately evident, as she called the court to order and demanded concise arguments. Sullivan opened with a dismissive tone, characterizing our case as a landowner's remorse after neglecting his property. He argued extensively about adverse possession laws, abandonment of property, and the economic benefits of the development. My client has invested over $7 million in good faith, he concluded, creating jobs and tax revenue for this community, while the plaintiff was out of the country, showing no interest in maintaining his inheritance. It was a polished performance, designed to frame Deanna as the responsible developer and me as the absent, uncaring landowner. William Fletcher approached the podium with the measured confidence of his 40 years of legal experience. Rather than making emotional appeals, he methodically presented evidence of the fraudulent permits, directing the judge's attention to specific documents where parcel numbers had been deliberately altered. He then revealed the approved historical landmark designation that Alexander Harris had suppressed, submitting affidavits from the State Historical Society confirming its validity. With each exhibit, Judge Turner's expression grew increasingly severe, her questions to Diana's attorney becoming more pointed. The most dramatic moment came when Dr. Henry Foster, a 65-year-old historical pomologist, testified about the national historical significance of the Hawkeye apples on my property. This variety is functionally extinct in commercial cultivation, he explained, displaying photographs of the destroyed trees. The Harrington orchard contained one of the last known original plantings from the 1870s. Its destruction represents an irreplaceable loss to agricultural history. The gallery murmured as he described how some of the destroyed trees had been alive during the Civil War. Alexander Harris was subpoenaed to testify, and under the pressure of potential perjury charges, was forced to admit numerous violations in the permitting process. His testimony revealed a pattern of deliberate obstruction regarding the historical designation and intentional misrepresentation of property boundaries. As Harris squirmed under Williams' cross-examination, Deanna's confident facade began to crack, her whispered instructions to Sullivan becoming increasingly frantic and visible to everyone in the courtroom. Our legal strategy unfolded layer by layer, each new revelation clearly shocking Diana's legal team, who had clearly been kept in the dark about many aspects of her scheme. Sullivan called for multiple recesses to consult with his client, returning each time with modified arguments that contradicted their previous positions. This inconsistency only strengthened our case, making it obvious they were improvising responses to evidence they hadn't anticipated. The breakthrough moment came when William presented evidence that my grandmother had applied for National Historical Landmark status for the apple orchard, which had been approved at the state level but deliberately blocked from final publication by Alexander Harris. Judge Turner's reaction was immediate and severe. "Mr. Harris," she interrupted, "are you telling this court that you deliberately suppressed an approved historical designation?" Harris stammered through an unconvincing explanation about administrative oversights, but the damage was done. The judge ordered a full investigation into his conduct as commissioner. Julia Morrison presented a detailed analysis of the environmental violations, focusing particularly on the impact to a rare bird species that nested in the old apple trees. Her presentation included expert testimony about the ecological significance of the orchard and the inadequate environmental review process that had been circumvented. For each violation she identified, she cited specific penalties under state and federal law, methodically building a case for substantial damages beyond just halting construction. Daniel Brooks had utilized his network of contacts to provide evidence of Deanna's similar behavior with other properties in the past, 3 former landowners testified about her tactics: misleading permits, boundary disputes, and pressure campaigns that forced them to sell at below market rates. This pattern of behavior significantly undermined Deanna's credibility and supported our contention that the current violations were deliberate rather than accidental. The tension in the courtroom escalated when several HOA board members appeared, confirming they had been misled about the legality of the project and the financial arrangements. Charles Wilson testified that he had only recently discovered that HOA maintenance funds had been diverted to finance preliminary construction costs without proper authorization, a potential criminal matter separate from the land dispute itself. This revelation caused visible discomfort among Diana's remaining supporters in the gallery. After 2 days of testimony, Judge Turner issued a detailed temporary restraining order, halting all construction activities immediately and requiring an independent environmental assessment of the damage already caused. Her order specifically cited the overwhelming evidence of permit fraud, deliberate misrepresentation of property boundaries, and willful suppression of historical designation. Furthermore, she referred Alexander Harris to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to official misconduct. Outside the courthouse, Diana approached me with a complex settlement offer, proposing shared ownership and profits. "We can partner on this, make it an ecotourism destination, preserve what's left of the orchard. It's a win-win solution," she suggested, her tone conciliatory but her eyes calculating. I could see she was already planning how to salvage her investment and reputation. "This isn't just about the land anymore, Diana," I replied firmly. "This is about everyone you've deceived, the corruption you've fostered, and my family's legacy you tried to erase. See you in court for the full hearing." Like 8 months, I walked the property alone, assessing the damage and planning restoration efforts. Near the center of what had been the orchard, I found one ancient apple tree still standing, one of the few survivors. Examining it more closely, I discovered old initials carved into the bark: DB plus EH, 1965. Deanna Bennett and Emma Harrington. This unexpected discovery suggested a more complex history than I'd known. Diana and my grandmother had once been friends before their falling out over land development, adding a layer of personal betrayal to Diana's actions. This wasn't just business, it was the culmination of a decades-long personal conflict that had finally come to a head. Diana launched a massive PR campaign against me within days of the injunction. She hired Windsor Communications, a high-end public relations firm specializing in crisis management, to portray me as an enemy of progress and economic development. Full-page newspaper advertisements appeared, showing architectural renderings of the hotel alongside statistics about job creation and tax revenue. Local radio featured interviews with construction workers who spoke emotionally about lost income. Posters appeared around town asking, "Why does Nathan Harrington hate progress?" with my photo prominently displayed. The pressure quickly became personal. Longtime clients began withdrawing their pets from my veterinary practice. Anonymous threatening letters appeared in my mailbox. One morning, I arrived at my clinic to find windows broken and selfish spray painted across the front door. The police took a report, but seemed uninterested in investigating thoroughly, another sign of Diana's far-reaching influence. Despite the intimidation, I remained focused on our legal strategy, knowing these tactics revealed Diana's desperation. Edward Bennett contacted me secretively, providing crucial internal documents, financial records, emails, and recorded board meetings, revealing that Diana had used HOA funds and taken high-interest loans from unidentified investors to finance the project. "She's mortgaged everything we own," Edward explained during a late-night meeting in a parking garage. "Our house, our retirement accounts, everything." Many Pinecrest residents unknowingly invested their life savings through a fake project investment fund she created. "If this fails, it's not just us who lose everything." His hands shook as he passed me a USB drive containing financial records. "I can't be part of this anymore. She's gone too far." The deeper investigation revealed the extent of Diana's financial gambling. She had leveraged every personal asset for the project, and many HOA residents had unknowingly invested through what amounted to a Ponzi scheme, promising guaranteed 15% returns on what they thought were secured investments. The hotel project wasn't just about land. It represented Diana's last chance to avoid financial ruin after a series of failed developments had drained her resources. This financial desperation made her even more dangerous, as she now had nothing left to lose. But toll began to show on me physically. Running my veterinary practice during the day while researching legal precedents and strategizing at night left little time for sleep. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and I lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks. Amber noticed my deterioration and insisted on bringing home-cooked meals to the cabin, often staying to help organize documents or simply provide moral support. Our late-night strategy sessions gradually revealed a deeper connection between us, forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. The community became increasingly divided as the story expanded beyond local news. Some residents supported the development and the jobs it promised, gathering for rallies organized by Diana's PR team. Others, concerned about corruption and environmental impact, formed a Save the Orchard committee that held their own events highlighting the historical significance of the property. Local businesses displayed signs declaring their position, and longtime neighbors found themselves in heated arguments at community gatherings. What had begun as a private property dispute had evolved into a referendum on the town's values and future. Amber wrote a detailed investigative piece exposing the corruption, but faced intense censorship pressure from senior editor John Weber, who had business connections with Diana. This is too one-sided, he claimed, redlining entire sections of well-documented evidence. We need to present a balanced view. When Amber pointed out that her article was based entirely on court documents and public records, Weber threatened to reassign the story. Rather than compromise her journalistic integrity, Amber took a leave of absence from the paper and published her findings through an independent online news platform, where it quickly went viral and attracted attention from larger regional outlets. I organized an information meeting for HOA residents, many of whom were shocked to learn about the financial risks Diana had exposed them to. The community center was packed as I methodically presented evidence of how their investments had been misrepresented and their association funds misappropriated. I'm not here to punish Pinecrest residents, I assured them. You're victims in this too. My goal is to hold those truly responsible accountable, while finding a solution that protects your investments. This approach won crucial allies within the HOA, including several board members who felt betrayed by Diana's deceptions. Despite the court injunction, Diana attempted to accelerate construction, hiring workers to continue building at night and filing an emergency appeal with falsified information claiming the project was 95% complete and any delay would cause irreparable financial harm to the community. Our legal team documented each violation, creating an irrefutable record of contempt for court orders. These violations strengthened our case further, demonstrating Diana's willingness to ignore legal rulings in pursuit of her goals. William discovered a decisive weakness in Diana's position. She had deliberately misrepresented the legal status of the land ownership to investors, which potentially constituted criminal securities fraud. This elevates the case beyond civil court, he explained during a strategy session. Securities fraud carries potential prison time. Once investors understand they've been defrauded, they'll likely file their own lawsuits. This revelation changed our approach from merely defending my property to potentially pursuing criminal charges that would permanently end Diana's development career. A major turning point came during a secret meeting with 4 HOA board members who wanted to distance themselves from Diana. They provided internal documentation about how she had manipulated HOA finances, including board minutes that had been altered after approval and financial statements with discrepancies that suggested systematic embezzlement. We were stupid, admitted board treasurer Deborah Allen. We trusted her business experience and didn't verify her claims. Now our family's financial security is at risk. Their testimony would prove crucial in the full hearing, demonstrating that Diana's deception extended far beyond just land development. James Wilson had secretly recorded Alexander Harris admitting knowledge of the legal violations and Diana's promise of a Florida vacation home in exchange for his cooperation. I know it wasn't entirely by the book, Harris could be heard saying on the recording, but Diana assured me the historical designation was just a technicality that was holding up important development. The vacation house was just a thank you for expediting things. This recording provided direct evidence of bribery and corruption that could not be explained away as administrative errors or misunderstandings. Diana made a desperate move, forging documents backdated to show I had agreed to sell the land using signatures copied from legitimate documents I had signed years earlier. Her team filed these forgeries with the court, claiming they had recently discovered our agreement. William immediately filed a motion demonstrating the forgeries through expert handwriting analysis and documentation showing I was in Ecuador on the date I had supposedly signed the documents. This clumsy attempt at fraud further damaged Diana's credibility with the court and resulted in sanctions against her legal team for submitting falsified evidence. I received a frightening ultimatum: drop the lawsuit or face irreversible consequences. The threat came in the form of a typed note left on my car windshield, accompanied by photographs of Amber's house and my veterinary clinic, with red X's marked over them. Rather than intimidating me, this escalation only strengthened my resolve and provided additional evidence of Diana's desperation and unethical tactics. We reported the threat to the FBI as attempted extortion, adding federal attention to the already growing legal scrutiny. In the most dramatic development yet, Amber and I returned to the property at midnight after receiving an anonymous tip, discovering that the remaining apple trees had been chainsawed to stumps. Carved into the trunk of the final tree, the one with the old initials, was a chilling message: still want to fight? Remember, friends need protection, not just trees. This act of vandalism, clearly meant to intimidate, instead became powerful evidence in our case, and generated significant public sympathy when photos appeared in regional news outlets. Diana had crossed a line that alienated even some of her previous supporters, who could not condone such malicious destruction of historical trees with no commercial purpose except revenge. The full hearing began on a Monday morning, with cameras from regional news stations positioned outside the courthouse. Judge Turner had allowed limited media coverage due to the significant public interest in the case. The courtroom was filled to capacity, with spectators lining the walls and an overflow room set up with video feed for those who couldn't fit inside. Diana arrived in a conservative gray suit, projecting confidence despite the growing evidence against her, while her attorney Jonathan Sullivan appeared visibly stressed as he arranged multiple binders of last-minute materials. Our legal strategy was meticulously presented over 3 days, with each team member handling different aspects of the case. William Fletcher addressed the property boundary violations and fraudulent permits, presenting original documents alongside the altered versions to demonstrate deliberate falsification. Julia Morrison covered the environmental violations, bringing in expert witnesses who detailed the ecological damage and the proper procedures that had been bypassed. I testified about my grandmother's preservation efforts and the historical significance of the orchard, while Amber presented her documented timeline of the construction and harassment. Diana's case began to collapse as William and our legal team systematically exposed each layer of fraud and forgery. Sullivan's arguments became increasingly contradictory as he attempted to address evidence he hadn't anticipated. The turning point came when 3 construction subcontractors agreed to testify about Diana's instructions to work without proper permits and on land she knew had boundary disputes. Ms. Bennett specifically told us to remove all surveyor stakes along the eastern border and to work through weekends to establish a foundation before any potential legal challenges could be filed, testified the concrete contractor, providing copies of text messages supporting his claims. In a dramatic development, the Pinecrest HOA board officially voted to remove Diana from leadership, sending a representative to testify about how she had manipulated financial records and misrepresented the legal status of the project to residents. Board Treasurer Deborah Allen provided documentation showing that Diana had diverted over $300,000 of HOA maintenance funds to pay for preliminary construction costs without proper authorization. A criminal misappropriation separate from the land dispute itself. We were deceived as much as anyone, Allen testified. Many residents invested their retirement savings based on fraudulent promises about permits and ownership. Judge Turner's detailed ruling strongly favored us on all points, with a powerful statement about the importance of legal process and protection of historical assets. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of permit fraud, boundary encroachment, deliberate suppression of historical designation, and misappropriation of HOA funds, she declared. The temporary restraining order is made permanent. All construction must cease immediately, and the property must be restored to its original condition to the extent possible. Furthermore, she referred Diana and Alexander Harris for criminal investigation on charges of fraud, corruption, and abuse of office. The final trap was revealed when I disclosed the hidden security camera system I had installed before departing for Ecuador, which had captured numerous incriminating conversations on my property, including Diana explicitly instructing workers to remove boundary markers and Alexander Harris admitting he had taken care of the historical designation paperwork. These surveillance footage, legally obtained on my own property, provided irrefutable evidence of conspiracy that could not be explained away as misunderstandings or administrative errors. Diana made a last desperate attempt in court, trying to blame everything on Alexander Harris and the HOA board members, claiming she was just a visionary who trusted the wrong people. When this failed to gain traction, she turned on her own attorney, suggesting he had failed to properly advise her of legal requirements. Judge Turner saw through these tactics, noting in her ruling that the defendant's attempt to shift blame demonstrates a pattern of avoiding responsibility that the court finds deeply troubling and indicative of the deliberate nature of these violations. Edward testified against his wife, revealing details of Diana's obsession with the property and long-term plan to acquire the orchard. This wasn't just about development, he explained soberly. Diana has been fixated on the Harrington property since before we were married. When Emma Harrington chose to preserve the orchard instead of developing it with Diana's help in the 1980s, Diana took it as a personal betrayal. This project was as much about revenge as profit. His testimony painted a picture of a decades-long vendetta stemming from a friendship turned sour over differing values about land preservation. The full family story emerged. Diana and my grandmother Emma had once been close friends before their falling out over land development approaches. What began as a business disagreement had festered into personal animosity when my grandmother published a letter in the local paper criticizing Diana's early development projects for their environmental impact. This public criticism had damaged Diana's reputation as a young developer and contributed to her first project's failure. The hotel wasn't just a business venture. It represented Diana's long-awaited vindication and revenge. Rather than seeking maximum financial penalties, I focused on restoration and accountability. I don't want to bankrupt families who were misled by Ms. Bennett, I explained in my final statement to the court. I'm proposing a structured settlement that holds the primary wrongdoers accountable while protecting innocent HOA members from losing their investments. This approach won approval from the judge and grudging respect from many Pinecrest residents who had feared losing everything due to Diana's actions. The investors and homebuyers filed their own lawsuit against Diana personally, but accepted my negotiated settlement to protect innocent HOA members from total financial loss. The agreement restructured the financial responsibilities to place the heaviest burden on those who had knowingly participated in the fraud, while creating a payment plan that allowed misled investors to recover a portion of their investments over time. This solution wasn't perfect, but it represented a fair balance between justice and mercy. Alexander Harris confessed to his role and agreed to cooperate with a broader investigation into corruption in the city government in exchange for a lighter sentence. His testimony implicated several other officials in a pattern of permit manipulation and zoning irregularities that had facilitated multiple questionable development projects over the past decade. This cooperation sparked a comprehensive ethics review of all city departments and the resignation of 2 senior officials who had been part of Diana's network. In the aftermath, I established a legal conservation trust to permanently protect the property from future development. With input from community members and environmental experts, we launched a plan to restore the heritage apple orchard, focusing on propagating the rare Hawkeye variety and creating a small educational center about agricultural history. Local schools began scheduling field trips, and university researchers arrived to study the few remaining original trees and collect genetic material for preservation. The partially completed hotel structure was converted into a sustainable agriculture research center through a partnership with the state university, with a portion of the proceeds shared with the HOA residents who had invested in the project. This compromise solution preserved some economic value from the construction while realigning the purpose with the historical agricultural character of the land. The concrete foundations that couldn't be removed were repurposed into community garden plots, transforming what had been intended as exclusive amenities into public resources. Diana faced multiple criminal and civil charges, losing her development license, real estate credentials, and community standing. The court ordered full financial restitution, though it was unclear how much could be recovered given the extent of her prior debts. The FBI investigation into the investment fraud aspects of the case continued, with potential federal charges still pending. Her public disgrace was complete when regional business publications ran features analyzing the case as a cautionary tale of development overreach and ethical failures. My relationship with Amber deepened through our shared ordeal, evolving from professional cooperation to personal connection. Her investigative skills and moral courage had been instrumental in exposing the truth, and her independent article on the case had been picked up by national publications, launching her freelance career. We began spending evenings on the porch of the cabin, planning restoration efforts and discussing future projects with a growing sense of partnership that extended beyond just the legal battle. 1 year later, the first new apple saplings began growing where the orchard had been. Using grafts from the surviving trees and heritage stock from agricultural preservation programs, we planted over 100 young Hawkeye apple trees, in the pattern my grandmother had maintained. I expanded my veterinary practice and began offering free services to animals from low-end families, honoring my grandmother's belief that stewardship extended to all living things. The land was healing, and with it, the community divisions began to mend as well. In a touching final discovery, I found my grandmother's old journal while clearing out a storage area in the cabin. The last entry read, "Remember, the land doesn't belong to us, we belong to the land. Protect it and it will protect you. And Nathan, dear, remember that justice doesn't always come quickly, but it always comes to those who are patient and prepared." Her wisdom had guided me through the entire ordeal, and her foresight had ultimately saved her beloved orchard for future generations. Sometimes bullies think they can manipulate the system, but they forget that the system was created to protect us if we understand how it works. Have you ever faced a similar situation where someone thought they could take advantage of you only to discover you were more prepared than they expected? Share your story in the comments below and subscribe to see more stories of justice served.